So there's four practices here. First one is strings one. So in this first task, we start off with half of a famous quote inside a variable called quote start, and we need to look up the other half of the quote manually and then add it to the example inside of another variable called quote end. So over here on the left, I've got quote start, I've got quote end. I've looked up what that is. So I'll put quote end, set it equal to the rest of that quote. I've assigned it to a variable called quote end. So then the next portion here says concatenate the two strings together to make a single string. So I'm going to call that final quote. So again, declare that variable, let final quote. We're going to set it equal to the value made up of quote start plus quote end. And we do that with these characters here. So the plus and then single quotes and a space is going to glue in one space, one character in between quote start, quote end. It's right here between reap and but. That's what that happens there. So just to show you, if I delete the space between those quotes, now those words touch. I'll do that, save, refresh. Now they're written properly there. So that is pretty much everything we need to do with strings 1. Let's take a look at strings 2 and see what we have going on there. So I'm going to change my preview here to strings 2. And this one's a little more complex. So what we need to do is take a look at the two variables that we have. We have the quote, and then we have the substring. And what we want to do is find the length of the quote and store it in a variable called quote length. We got that here. So dot length is a method that's built into JavaScript. It tells us how long something is, or how many characters. So if I say quote, I can see down here in the preview of the console, I can see the full quote. If I do quote.length, it's going to tell me 63. So 63 characters, including spaces. Next, it says find the index position where the substring appears in quote, and store that value in a variable called index. First thing we're going to do is define the value, variable called index. And so that index, and it says find the position where the substring appears in quote. So the substring is this portion. So it's a string that's subordinate to something else, maybe a portion of the text. So green eggs and ham is repeated there. So we want to know what that character is, what G is. So I can count manually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. But that would be kind of tedious. So there's a method that we can use called index of. You can see that here. What this is going to do is tell me the index of whatever parameter I pass to it. So in this case, it's a variable. It could be another word. It tells me the index of that word. So I'm telling it, look in quote, tell me the index of the substring inside of the quote. So if I just take this out and test it in the console, copy, paste, that's the value I get. So we have 14. Remember I counted up to 15. Well, the index of starts counting at 0. So it's going to go 0 through 14, giving us 15 positions or values, indexes. So the next thing it says, using a combination of variables that we already have, and available string property is a method to trim the original quote to I do not like green eggs and ham, storing it in a variable called revised quote. So what we can do here is we can start with defining the variable revised quote, because that's the easy part. And then it says use basically anything that we know how to do right now. Trim down, so trim down the original quote. So in order to do that, there's another method that we can use, and it's called slice. So if we take a look at what that might be, this assignment presumes that you've already read through this handling text strings in JavaScript. So if you've gone through this, it's going to cover the basics of how to create a string, the rules, it's got to be in quotes when you assign it to a variable, rules of singles and double quotes, and escaping characters. So if you've got an apostrophe inside of your string, you need to escape it with a backslash, or use double quotes. Concatenating numbers versus strings, template literals, which we haven't talked about yet. So that might not be helpful. So then there's also another section in here. So we're looking at Learn Web Development, JavaScript, First Steps, Handling Text. Then there's this additional page that says Useful String Methods. So it's treating strings as objects. Doesn't sound like anything we want to do, but talks about the length that we're already doing. So retrieve a specific string character. Find a substring inside a string and extract it. Oh, that's exactly what we've been doing. So that's our index of. And then it's wanting us to search. Oh, okay, so when you know where a substring starts, which we do, because we know the length is 14, and you know which character you want it to end, we can slice with parentheses here to extract it. So, based on that, we can come up with a line like this. So we already know that it says we want the revised quote variable. We want to take the first full quote and we want to slice from index 0, so the letter I, to index plus substring length plus 1. So index is 14 plus the length of the substring. So it's going to give us, starting here, 14 plus that. So however long green eggs and ham is, check. Substring length is 18 characters. So we're going to go 0 to 18. So now if we do substring length, it gives us 18, but we actually need the period as well. So if we were to count all these out, 1 to 0 through 15 on the G of green, and then we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, but that only gets us ham, and it doesn't get us the period. So we have to plus 1 that. So we're going to add 1 to the number of the length of the substring. So it gives us 19. So that kind of sums up strings 2. And then while we're here, let's look at strings 3, which is going to be equally as fun. So strings 3 says we've been given the same quote that we ended up with in the previous task, but it's broken. We need to fix it and update it. So whatever this says here, it says I do not like pickled onions. Oh, I see. So our quote now is all uppercase and odd looking, and we need to fix it. So there's a few steps we've already done on this. So the first thing we want to do is change the case to correct the sentence. So we want all lowercase except for the first letter. So in order to do that, we've got some built-in methods. First one is called toLowercase. If we come back here to the useful string methods, you're going to see, hey look, there's a changing case section. 2 lowercase, 2 uppercase. So we got that nabbed. Then we want to find the first letter and convert it to uppercase. So we've got a couple steps in between in order for that to work. First one, we have to slice that letter. So just like we did in strings 2, we sliced 0 as the first index and then a number to get to the second. So in order to get the first, we just want to slice off 0 through 1, which only gives us 0. That's what that line does. Then we're going to set the new value to fixed quote so that it's fixed quote, and we're going to replace the first letter that we just defined, which is going to be the capital I, but we've already lowercased it, so it's a lowercase I along with everything else. So we're going to take first letter, and then we're going to use the to uppercase method. That's going to achieve our goal there to get this letter I caps. So next it says replace green eggs and ham with another food you don't like. So I'm going to comment this line out temporarily, refresh. So you can see here it says I do not like green eggs and ham. And all we're doing is running this replace method. And if we go over here, it says update parts of the string. We can use the replace method, and we tell it to look for one thing, replace with another. So replace takes 2 parameters. In this example, it says replace moz with ban. In ours, we're going to replace green eggs and ham with pickled onions. So when I re-enable that, save, refresh, JavaScript does its magic there and replaces it. And finally, strings 4, you get the name of a theorem. So yeah, I hate to tell you, we're doing math. And this is the Pythagorean theorem, where we're going to use a couple values. We're going to calculate the lengths of the triangle and the hypotenuse and all that fun stuff. So first off, we're going to give the theorem its name. So we're going to say let theorem equal Pythagorean theorem. And you can see this code's already finished, but we'll step through it here. So I'm going to change this from a regular string literal into a template literal. So template literals are ways that we can put in placeholders for variables inside a string where we don't have to do some extra concatenation with all the pluses and quotes. So you write a template literal by using a $ and curly braces, and then pass it a value. So in this case, we're passing it the theorem string. So we've got the name of the theorem, we've got 2 numbers, A and B, set to 5 and 8. And then we want to calculate the length of the hypotenuse of the right triangle. The 2 other side lengths are the same as the 2 values we have. So we need to look up how to calculate the Pythagorean theorem, which is length times, let's see, square root of A plus square root of B, or sorry, not square root, A squared plus B squared, and then we take the square root of that whole thing. So let's take a look at Pythagorean theorem. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So it's one side of a right triangle to the other side of a right triangle gives us the hypotenuse, so the length of the third side. Now we know how that function, theorem works. We're outputting this big string here on the page with these string template literals. So the way this works, though, is we have to have these backticks in order for that string to output correctly. So these aren't single quotes or apostrophes. These are backticks. So these happen on the top left of your keyboard in the tilde key without holding shift. So we do backtick words, and then the literal here, $, curly brace, variable, and then another curly brace, and the rest of our text, and then we go back into these literals here. So we'll also put all the math into a literal. So I'm doing math, which is capital M for the API name here, object, and then we're going to do method, square root, parentheses. So we're wrapping all of that together. So order of operations happens here. So a squared plus b squared. And we're doing the square root, so that's the opposite of c squared. So we're going to break that up that way. A number. So that wraps up strings form.